Do you want to talk about your culture? Introducing the online web TV, Afrique Today, where you can watch us live at the same time on 4 platforms: Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and using the Afrique Today app. Download our app today for Android or Apple. Promote your business today. For more information, go to www.afriquetoday.com. Afrique Today, the best of digital TV. Watch Democracy Grow, in collaboration with other diaspora organizations, are delighted to invite you to the 2020 Annual Zoom Conference, scheduled to take place October 24th, 25th, 26th, and 27th from 9:30 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This year's theme, Building a Healthy and Wealthy Africa. And for the topics to be discussed, do not miss these as well. Just go to watchdemocracygrow.org and register for this conference by clicking the event button. Then go to Zoom registration. But also, as you watch Democracy Grow, don't forget that early voting starts October 26th in Montgomery County, Maryland.
En vue de performer vos compétences et intégrer l'espace de l'entrepreneuriat digital, la nouvelle Chambre de commerce nationale et la nouvelle Chambre de commerce USA-RDC, en partenariat avec Diaspo Academy, installée aux États-Unis d'Amérique, vous offrent des sessions de formation en entrepreneuriat digital à des coûts réduits. Ces formations vous permettront d'intégrer le monde numérique et améliorer vos compétences en digital au bénéfice de cette terre d'avenir et grand marché qu'est la République démocratique du Congo. Pour participer aux formations, envoyez vos contacts WhatsApp au +243 99 073 0795. Enregistrez-vous aujourd'hui car les places sont limitées. Diaspo Academy, la plateforme des professionnels du digital.
Do you want to promote your business? Do you want to talk about your nonprofit organization? Do you want to talk about your culture? Introducing the online web TV, Afrique Today, where you can watch us live at the same time on 4 platforms: Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and using the Afrique Today app. Download our app today for Android or Apple. Promote your business today. For more information, go to www.afriquetoday.com. Afrique Today, the best of digital TV. Watch Democracy Grow, in collaboration with other diaspora organizations, are delighted to invite you to the 2020 Annual Zoom Conference, scheduled to take place October 24th, 25th, 26th, and 27th from 9:30 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This year's theme, Building a Healthy and Wealthy Africa. And for the topics to be discussed, do not miss these as well. Just go to watchdemocracygrow.org and register for this conference by clicking the event button. Then go to Zoom registration. But also, as you watch Democracy Grow, don't forget that early voting starts October 26th in Montgomery County, Maryland.
L'entrepreneuriat digital vous intéresse-t-il? Vous voulez apprendre à construire des projets digitaux? Aimeriez-vous gagner des revenus passifs conséquents en tout lieu? Voici la plateforme des professionnels du digital, la Diaspo Academy. Ici, vous retrouverez les meilleurs professionnels de la diasporama mondiale connectés sur notre plateforme. Vous allez pouvoir acquérir des formations adéquates qui feront de vous des entrepreneurs digitaux compétents. Étudiants, entrepreneurs, coachs, instructeurs et entreprises, Diaspo Academy est une opportunité pour vous. Elle vous offre la possibilité de suivre votre formation en mode virtuel à partir de chez vous, ou que vous soyez sur la planète. Toutes nos formations disponibles en ligne sont dispensées de manière interactive. Il suffit de vous inscrire et vous pourrez les suivre depuis chez vous. Au cours de la formation, vous passerez des quiz et examens selon votre parcours. En outre, à partir de votre tableau de bord, vous suivrez vos performances et progressions. Vous pourrez aussi communiquer avec vos instructeurs et recevoir des notifications. À la fin de votre parcours de formation, vous recevrez un certificat Diaspo Academy Certified. Que vous soyez débutant ou responsable d'entreprise, Diaspo Academy est une opportunité pour vous. Saisissez-la! Enfin, que vous soyez coach ou instructeur, ayez accès à un millier d'étudiants à travers notre plateforme. Merci de choisir Diaspo Academy, le meilleur choix. Pour plus d'informations, allez sur www.diaspoacademy.com. Diaspo Academy, la plateforme des professionnels du digital.
Good evening to everyone joining us for the third and last part of our three-part series on domestic violence. I am happy to welcome you again on Afrique Today TV, a digital African TV based in the United States of America. I'm happy to, the topic today is domestic child abuse. This program is sponsored by the Pacha Foundation, a charity based in the United States of America, and the Cameroon Doctors Association, a registered charity in the United Kingdom, also known as Camdock, UK. For the past few weeks, you have probably been made aware, or you have probably seen videos and read testimonies of women, young girls, and even child abuse. The perpetrators, for the most part, were individuals living with them. So allow me to say it again on this introduction. Subject of abuse is still a taboo in most communities in general, but Black and African homes in particular. This is part of the reason why we have decided to get the cat out of the bag and discuss it, to raise awareness on the impact such behaviors can have on our loved ones. If you've been following us since the beginning and have listened to part 1 and part 2 of this saga, then you know by now that COVID-19 pandemic played a huge part in increasing the rate of domestic violence. Nous conduirons cette émission en français et en anglais, comme pour les émissions précédentes, étant donné que notre audience est bilingue. Je suis le Dr Vicky Moi, chercheur clinique à l'Université de Birmingham au Royaume-Uni et trésorière de l'association Camdock UK. Today with me are three fabulous ladies working with children, and together we will explore the impact that domestic abuse has on our kids. Our fourth panelist is Mrs. Karen Mushingham. She is a corporate communicator, graduate in human resources management. She is the president, founder of Save a Child Cameroon, which is an NGO taking care of orphans, street children, and people in difficulties. She is passionate about youth. She devotes part of her life to supporting young girls and enable them to reach their full potential. Mrs. Karen Mushingham firmly believes that, motivated by love, we can improve the living conditions of those around us. She's a mother of 3 children and she's a wife. She's also co-founder of a religious organization, ELL Ministry, that stands for Eden Love and Love. Please welcome with me Ms. Karen Mushingham. Good evening, Karen. Would you like to say something?
Good evening, our viewers and all those who are listening to us. I know we have a nice show, and I think through this show, people will know more about how to handle children and how to make them more happy and raise awareness against violence on children.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mrs. Corinne. So our second panelist is Dr. Judwin Doe. Dr. Doe is a pediatric doctor at Queen's Medical Centre in Nottingham, the United Kingdom. She's a public health nutritionist. She knows everything about food. And also the General Secretary for Camdock UK. Welcome, Dr. Doe.
Well, thank you very much, Vicky.
Right, and our last panelist, but not least, and you will agree with me during this show, is Miss Noella Epier. Noella is a feminist and activist for gender equality. She's also the host of the show Straight Talk with Noella Epier. Currently, Noella is an aid worker in the northwest region of Cameroon and has a lot of experience in working with children, and especially those in that region. Welcome, Noella.
Thank you so much, Vicky. Thank you for having me on the show. I hope that we're going to have an amazing time together, raising awareness on an issue that is ravaging the lives of young children, especially young girls, during the pandemic. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for accepting the invitation. And so without further ado, here comes the first question. So what would you say child abuse is? And if that's okay, I'll start with Karin. What do we really understand by child abuse?
Vicky a associé au tête des shows in English and French, so let me start with French. Ce que nous pouvons appeler abus sur enfants ou violence, c'est toute forme de violence faite aux enfants, que ce soit des violences physiques, des violences émotionnelles ou des maltraitances ou de la négligence. Donc c'est tout cela que nous mettons sur les abus, les violences sur les enfants. Et nous devons dire que ça va des enfants de 0 jusqu'à 18 ans. Donc il y a des violences physiques, il y a des violences sexuelles, il y a des violences émotionnelles, il y a des violences de rejet ou de négligence. Voilà, c'est ce que nous pouvons appeler déjà, c'est comme ça que nous pouvons décrire les abus sur les enfants ou les violences sur les enfants.
Thank you very much, Corinne. And Noella, do you have anything to add to what Mrs. Corinne?
Just add that there is a thin line between abuse and violence. And so when we talk about abuse, generally we'll be talking about issues arising from the fact that someone who is responsible for a child has failed in that responsibility. So trust has been broken, and then violence has set in. I'm not sure I got Karine clearly, but let's be clear that a child is anyone who is below 18. And so that's the category of people that we're talking about when we're talking about child abuse.
Exactly.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Noella. And Dr. Doe, anything to add to that definition that beautiful lady just started to set in?
So thank you very much, Vicky. My two co-panelists have said a lot already. And what I'd like people to know, and what I always tell people as a pediatric doctor, is that for starters, children are not little adults. Children are children. They're a whole category on their own. And every child has the right to survive, the right to education, and the right to protection. And because, like I said, children are not small adults, they are people on their own. Children by themselves cannot provide these basic needs and these basic rights. And so the responsibility for these rights, to provide these rights to children, belongs to the state. And the children's parents and caregivers have the responsibility as their caregivers to ensure that they provide an adequate environment for children to have these basic rights and to thrive. And so in addition to the definitions that my companies have already defined, so the child abuse is all those forms of abuse that have as end result to have a negative impact on the child. And these impacts can be the impact on their survival, the impact on their education, their school performance, their health, and as well as just their ability to thrive and to develop and to just be a child.
All right. Thank you very much for this brilliant definition, Dr. Nzo. And just to, just as a follow-up question to what you just said, what are those type of abuse that children are victims of? Dr. Nzo, if we start with you.
So, yeah, thank you. So the main categories of abuse, and this is just really for, just to be able for the services that deal with child abuse to be able to have a good definition. It's for taxonomic purposes, really, because there's an overlap between the various types of abuse. So neglect is the most common form of abuse, and neglect is the inability to meet up with the basic needs of a child, the emotional needs of a child as well. So has to do with providing nutrition, providing shelter, just ensuring the child has good health, taking the child to the hospital when they are poorly, or just following up on these issues. And mind you, not just malnutrition, that's undernutrition, but obesity is also a form of neglect. And you also have physical abuse. So physical abuse, as its name implies, is using physical violence on a child, hitting a child, shaking babies, and just any form of harm that a child can experience. And then you also have emotional abuse. Emotional abuse is really to do with just impacting on the child's emotional well-being, just being abusive towards a child, any acts that impact on the child's development and emotional health and mental health status. And then the last category is the sexual abuse category. And of late, we've been seeing a lot of videos circulating on social media of children, of child rapists being caught. However, sexual abuse is not just direct penetration. I'm not sure in the context of Cameroon, because I know the laws define it different, but sexual abuse is just getting the child engaged in practices that violate their sexuality. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Shidreen. Mrs. Kerry Nushingham, is there anything else that I know that Dr. Shidreen just, laid it down there. So, but is there anything else that you would like to add, or just
She did. She presented these different forms of violence so good. What I just wanted to add is that in Cameroon, sexual violence in a certain region is accepted because of the mœurs, the coutume there. I met a man of about 45 years old who was so proud to tell me that he's married to a 13 years old girl. So c'est très grave. 44 ans avec une fille de 13 ans, and he said, I have paid the price to the fathers with cows. So this little girl, just at 13, she stopped school, everything. She's sexually abused. And when you were looking at that girl, you can notice that she's really sad and she's suffering somewhere. But the man was talking with a lot of pride of how he's having a young girl as a wife, and he told me the parents are the one who gave her to me, and I pay a price for that. So sometimes when you want to as an association, when we are on the field and we meet sort of things, we are like, so are we fighting now against the coutume, the mœurs of those areas, or what? Because he's clearly saying to you that he's on his right, he's not doing something bad. So sorts of sexual abuse are just really too painful for us to bear. We have another form of sexual abuse in Africa, what we call secret society. People are going with babies because they think they'll have some power to get rich or whatever. So this problem also is what we usually meet on the field as association.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Mashiam. And Noella, is there anything else? Yeah.
Yeah, just to add, Vicky, from what Madam Karine mentioned about culture and when we come to violence or that perpetrate violence, especially against children, and customs and traditions that should be celebrated. Of course, up until now, the question we are asking ourselves is, should child marriage be condoned with? Because a group of people say this is our custom and this is our tradition. Of course, there's a part of the law that says any customs and traditions that is repugnant to equity and natural justice then should not be practiced. But then again, the challenge is how do you eradicate in its entirety customs and traditions like that? We had a case recently of a girl who was married at 13, just something similar to what Madam Karini is explaining. And the imam and the traditional leaders are saying, but this is acceptable where we come from. It is our tradition. Um, what I mean, where do you even take the case to? Do you take it to a customary law court? Do you take it to a statutory law court? Because of course there is customary law has its place in Cameroon and in Africa, but we know that in the hierarchy of laws, customary law is somewhere underneath. So whatever is violence, whatever is considered as an abuse statutorily and constitutionally, and according to international human rights, then it's abuse. I just wanted to make this clear, moving forward, because in some parts of Cameroon we still have young girls who are married off at that very tender age. Also, just to add that another form of abuse which we are seeing is trafficking, especially with girls, because sometimes we see little girls that are given up to other families to serve as house helps or as maids, and in exchange for some token fee, whoever she's going to be working with would be paying to her family, or they'd say, we're going to stay with her for 2 years or for 1 year, within which time she'll be going to school, within which time we'll be giving her food. That's child abuse. And I mean, it's trafficking. No child should be doing that. So we're seeing that a lot. Unfortunately, many people do not realize that is abuse, but it is. Um, Jordan and Madam Karen already mentioned sexual violence, which is very, very recurrent in many communities, especially in 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 the southwest and in the northern part of Cameroon. However, we are still seeing traces of girls who are being mutilated. So it's a work in progress for as far as changing mindset and changing these practices is concerned.
Okay. Thank you very much, Noella, for this very explicit and well elaborated, type of abuse that children are victims of. I know that you're working with children with disability as well. So on top of all those type of abuse, of course, that we've mentioned, is there something else in particular that special group of children are being victim of, and that needs to be put out there so that people know about them?
Thank you so much, Vicky, for highlighting that. Of course, we know that children, like persons with disabilities, have some unique challenges, given the special needs that they have. One of the challenges that children generally would face is exclusion, that they are unable to integrate adequately in the society as children without disabilities. But on top of that, children with disabilities, especially girls with disabilities, are at higher risk of experiencing these different forms of violence especially who lives in the house always, fondles with me and touches me inappropriately, but I cannot do anything because I cannot even run or I cannot even shout. So we have children with different types of disabilities, maybe hearing impairment or visual or mobility issues that face these different kinds of abuse on a different scale, and it's very high for them.
All right, thank you very much, Noella. That was really, highly appreciated because I know that, I know about the different type of abuse that children are suffering from. But obviously, like I said, it is important to know that children with disability and those without disability obviously do have, there is some gray area that we need to put up the light. It's becoming very clear that there are so many things children can be exposed to. So if you don't mind, Noella, I'll stick with you. Do we have some basic facts on child abuse? I mean, how common it is? You've already, highlighted a little bit with the history that you and Mrs. Mushingam have been, telling us. But how common, would you mind telling us in Cameroon, how common is that?
Just let me go globally, given that we're talking to an audience that's a little out of Cameroon. To say that it's estimated that about 1 in 6 children would experience child labor. Let's understand that in contexts where families are unable to meet their needs, these children are expected to go out there and fend for themselves, or at least.
Okay, I think we're losing Noella. Dr. Do you want to give us some numbers, if you have any numbers for us, and then Noella will probably kick in.
Right. So, for starters, Noella and Karina, they did raise very important points. But what I'd like us to understand is that child abuse is highly underreported, and because of there's so many reasons why child abuse is so underreported. For starters, children children don't feel comfortable reporting child abuse, and for various reasons, people tend to, for cultural reasons, social reasons, people tend to want to hide this abuse, especially if they, it's going to bring dishonor to their families. And so worldwide, like I said earlier, neglect is the most common form of child abuse, and depending on how you define it, depending on the cultural factors, taking the cultural context and the various types of abuse, there are reports that up to 1 in 3 children do experience some form of child abuse, and unfortunately, this usually gets reported much later in life. So when you go into society, into the community, to try to find out how common child abuse is, you likely will get far fewer rates. But later on in life, in adult life, and when you do surveys to see how many children have been abused previously in their lives, then you realize that it's actually a lot more common than that. And like I said earlier, with neglect being really, really common. And I was going to talk about some reasons why, but I suppose that's going to come up later. So I'll pass it back I'll give you back the word.
All right, thank you, Dr. And do you have any numbers for us when we talk about child abuse, globally in Cameroon?
So globally, about the reports of about 1 billion children worldwide who've ever been abused. In Cameroon, it's a lot different. And when I tried to look up the stats, they were not the stats were not very recent. But some statistics talk of as many as some would say 4,500 children. And they give, and I think it depends on what they're looking at. If they're looking at sexual abuse, and sexual abuse, they'll be looking more at rape than other things. So rather than things like neglect is really, really underreported in Cameroon. But there's some reports that up to more than 4,000 in a year of children who will be raped at some point, and these usually are seen when they assess them when they are older. In the UK, about 1 in 7 children are abused, and some reports say about 1 in 3 sometimes, and in the US as well, up to 1 in 3 children have experienced some form of abuse in their lifetime.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Nzo. Madam Karine.
Yes,
the floor is yours. Is there any number that you would like to give us when it comes to child abuse? You know, do you have any other sources with different numbers, or do you agree with what Dr. Nzo said and Noella was just starting to tell us?
Dr. Judine l'a déjà dit, les statistiques ne sont pas vraiment fiables parce qu'il y a beaucoup d'autres facteurs. Elle a parlé d'un facteur qui m'intéresse beaucoup, c'est la négligence et le facteur familial. Parce qu'il y a des maltraitances dans les familles, mais on n'ose pas signaler de peur de briser la famille, comme on dit. Il y a les enfants, par exemple, des sœurs qui sont chez leur tante et qui sont maltraitées par cette dernière. Cet enfant déjà a peur de porter à sa maman parce que la maman va faire des histoires à sa sœur. Du coup, l'enfant subit en silence et est maltraité comme ça sans qu'on ne puisse remarquer. C'est peut-être plus tard, quand l'enfant va grandir ou repartir définitivement chez ses parents, que l'enfant aura le courage de dire à ses parents, bon voilà, quand j'étais chez Tata, je t'ai traité comme ça, je t'ai traité comme ci. L'autre négligence qui amène beaucoup aux abus sexuels, l'autre forme qui amène beaucoup aux abus sexuels, c'est la négligence. C'est-à-dire les parents, pour des besoins économiques, qui sortent tôt de la maison, qui laissent des enfants à eux-mêmes, les voisins qui sont là, l'enfant de 3 ans qui se balade comme ça et qui n'a pas de protection et qui fait la proie, n'est-ce pas, à ces prédateurs qui sont dehors, qui sont peut-être le voisin, le tonton. Donc, il y a une grande forme de négligence qui est due à la situation économique également du pays, dont les parents sont exclus carrément de leur devoir de protection envers les enfants, parce qu'ils vous donnent des raisons telles que je dois sortir très tôt pour aller chercher de quoi nourrir les enfants. Je rentre tard, je suis fatiguée. Je n'ai pas le temps de poser la question aux enfants de savoir comment était la journée, est-ce que tonton a touché ou quoi. Donc, il y a ces conditions sociales-là qui amènent beaucoup d'abus et qui font qu'on n'arrive même pas à pouvoir donner des statistiques réelles de ce qui se passe dans les maisons. Mais c'est horrible parce que j'ai ma fille qui est à l'école, qui était au cours -1, that's class 5, et qui m'a rapporté carrément qu'une de ses amies lui a parlé du fait qu'elle pouvait avoir des attouchements. Et une enfant de 10 ans qui vous dit qu'elle est lesbienne et qu'à la maison, les parents rentrent tard, elle a le temps de regarder tout ce qu'elle veut à la télé avec ses frères et ses sœurs et qu'entre eux, ils s'entraînent à pratiquer ce qu'ils voient à la télé. Donc, déjà, je pense que même entre eux, les enfants sont abusés. Un grand frère qui abuse de sa petite sœur parce que les parents sont absents. Donc, il y a beaucoup de choses qui se passent dans des maisons. Et lorsque nous allons dans la rue également avec les enfants de la rue, ce qu'ils nous rapportent pour la plupart du temps, c'est les maltraitances domestiques, donc ce qu'ils vivent dans les maisons qui les amènent à fuguer et à se retrouver dans la rue. Alors que dans la rue, ils sont encore plus exposés à toute forme de violence, des viols, d'où des cas de grossesse indésirée pour certaines jeunes filles et très tôt, ou de la drogue, où il y a beaucoup d'autres. Je pense qu'on va aborder cela dans les conséquences, mais vraiment le problème des abus des enfants, c'est énorme au Cameroun, c'est énorme.
D'accord, merci beaucoup de nous avoir élaboré dessus. Juste pour rester avec vous, maintenant que vous nous avez dit que en réalité c'est exacerbé par le fait que les parents sont toujours en train de sortir, ils sont jamais à la maison. Est-ce que vous pensez que ceci a changé avec la pandémie Covid-19? Maintenant, il y a eu le confinement, donc les parents à la maison. Je vais dire, si on aborde le côté neglect, peut-être, peut-être pas. Qu'est-ce que vous pensez? Comment est-ce que la pandémie pourrait avoir affecté les violences domestiques? sur les enfants?
Merci Vicky. Malheureusement, on aurait cru qu'avec la négligence du fait de sortir, avec le confinement, les choses se seront améliorées. Mais les parents ont développé une autre forme de maltraitance due au stress qu'ils n'arrivaient pas à gérer. Donc les enfants ont subi ce qu'on appelle plus de maltraitance physique et de maltraitance émotionnelle parce qu'ils étaient rejetés comme si c'était à eux la faute. La pandémie, c'était, n'est-ce pas, leur faute. Les parents étaient plus violents à la maison, dans les paroles et physiquement même envers les enfants. Donc, on assistait à beaucoup plus de bagarres, on assistait à beaucoup plus de bagarres entre les parents qui affectaient émotionnellement les enfants et aussi des paroles très, très dures que les parents, n'est-ce pas, balançaient aux enfants. Et malgré le confinement, il y avait également la séparation dans la maison. Donc, les parents sont de leur coin, les enfants sont dans leur coin et il y avait beaucoup de tensions. Au lieu que ça crée un moment de retrouvailles, un moment de complicité entre les parents et les enfants, et ils auraient pu profiter, n'est-ce pas, de ce temps-là pour établir de très bonnes relations avec leurs enfants. Mais non, comme ils ne pouvaient pas gérer le stress, parce que la pandémie n'a pas ôté le problème de difficultés financières qui était posé déjà. Donc, avec ce problème, et on ne pouvait pas sortir, les parents ont développé une autre forme de maltraitance qui était plus physique et qui était plus émotionnelle envers les enfants.
Merci beaucoup. Et je suis très contente, en fait, que vous abordiez le côté émotionnel que la pandémie peut avoir causé sur les enfants. Parce que juste pour rappeler à notre audience, si vous ne nous avez pas suivis, dans les parties 1 et 2 de notre saga, nous parlons des violences domestiques sur les femmes et sur les jeunes enfants. Donc, je vous invite à les regarder pour comprendre ce que Madame Luchinga vient de dire lorsqu'elle dit que les parents bagarrent entre eux et évidemment, ça affecte les enfants. Dr. Nzo, how do you see the COVID-19 pandemic? How do you see the way it changed child abuse, or has it?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Kamwa. So certainly, we have to understand that parents, even though parents are caregivers to children and parents are responsible for the well-being of children, but the main perpetrators of child abuse are parents and caregivers themselves. So if you look at the consequences of the pandemic, I think we've covered a lot of this in previous sessions. We've talked about domestic violence. There's been an increase in domestic violence following the pandemic. There's been an increase in mental health problems, in poverty as well, because poverty is a significant risk factor for child abuse. And so all of these factors impact negatively on a child's health and the ability of parents to look after their children, having to spend more time with their children as well. And so there's been an increase in child abuse significantly. So some preliminary reports have said there's an increase of about 20% in child abuse. And this is a bit paradoxical because so schools have closed. So from the very beginning of the pandemic, now schools are starting to reopen, but from the very beginning of the pandemic, schools were closed. And schools are one of the places where child abuse is very frequently picked up. That's where you have some other person apart from the caregiver or the parent looking after the child. And so they're more likely to have longer periods of interaction with children. They're more likely to pick up child abuse. And so there were concerns from the beginning of the pandemic that a lot of child abuse would go undetected. But it's now known in terms of physical abuse. So it's a bit too early to say if there's been an increase in the rates of abuse. But there's been some studies that have shown, there's a study that looked at child abuse over a month, and actually there was an increase in rates of physical abuse. But actually most of the abuse relating to COVID, I mean, you think that with people spending more time with their children and, you know, being able to provide more emotional support, it looks like it's rather the other way around, unfortunately. And so you have increased rates of neglect. There's more neglect, more emotional abuse as well. Because of all this, you know, spending time together. So there's definitely been an increase in child abuse following COVID, as well as child mental health problems, which are all risk factors for child abuse.
All right. Thank you very much for highlighting this. I don't know if we have Ms. Epie back. No, do we have? Well, it seems we haven't. So we're just going to move forward, and I know that talking about how common it is, how the pandemic changed or impacted on the child abuse. You've kind of started to answer some few questions, as in like factors responsible for child abuse. Aside from what you just told us, is there anything else that you would like to when it comes to factors responsible for child abuse? Dr. Nzo.
Thank you, Dr. Kamwa. So actually, for like we mentioned earlier, there's a context of child abuse, and the child abuse is child abuse no matter what. It's you can say that it's contextual, and I think Madame Karine mentioned earlier, she said some cultures find child marriage, for example, acceptable, but actually it's not acceptable by the law. So in terms of risk factors, so there are some risk factors related to child abuse, as you'd imagine. So look at prematurity, looking at child factors themselves. So children who are premature, who have long-term chronic conditions, who require more care, those fragile children usually are classed as a vulnerable category. Children with disabilities, both mental health problems as well as physical disabilities, and generally the female gender. So female children are more likely to be sexually abused. However, male children, males are more likely to have physical abuse than female children, or more severe forms of physical abuse. And kids as well who looked after or who have parents with mental health problems, and kids who live in a home with domestic violence, in the context of the theme of this discussion. So kids who live in a home with domestic violence, whose parents have mental health problems, and we should not forget poverty. So poverty is a very big risk factor for mental health abuse. So I think there's other social problems like being a teenage mom, lack of support from the dad. So having a family with both parents present, especially the role of the dad cannot be underlooked, is very important in preventing child abuse and neglect generally. And in Cameroon especially, so things like factors like polygamy and just lots of cultural differences. In some environments, children are accused of witchcraft, for example. That's a really bad form of emotional abuse that can lead to physical abuse and sometimes even death.
And just like I was saying in the beginning, we've seen loads of videos, going around on social media and talking about, these parents abusing their child because they've been told that she's a witch. And yeah, I'm really happy that we're talking about this subject today. Mrs. Karine, I'm not sure we have you in the panel, but okay. Is there anything else when we talk about factors responsible? I know that Dr. Nzo just brilliantly elaborated on that, but are you thinking about something else that could, predispose a child to be more abused compared to another one? And is there any other factor played during this pandemic that you're thinking of?
Docteur Zo a vraiment tout dit, mais je voudrais ajouter le facteur de l'alcoolisme. L'alcoolisme est un facteur, n'est-ce pas, déclencheur pour des abus et des violences également chez les enfants. Récemment, alors que j'étais sur un autre plateau pour débattre des enfants, il a été porté à ma connaissance qu'en Afrique du Sud, il y a des parents qui boivent beaucoup, qui se saoulent pendant la grossesse, des femmes qui se saoulent pendant la grossesse pour rendre des enfants malades à la naissance parce qu'elles doivent toucher les allocations. Donc, voilà une mère qui consciemment commence à maltraiter son fœtus déjà en prenant beaucoup d'alcool. Là, elle est sûre qu'elle va donner naissance déjà à un enfant malade pour pouvoir toucher des allocations. Donc, c'est un facteur à la fois de pauvreté et d'alcoolisme. Donc, le facteur d'alcoolisme également apporte beaucoup de violence. Si on sait aussi que les parents qui boivent ont tendance à être violents des fois, donc c'est noté qu'un parent qui rentre sous, il peut devenir violent à n'importe quel moment et frapper l'enfant ou bien abuser même sexuellement de son enfant, ou des parents qui sont sous des drogues, sous l'effet des drogues, n'est-ce pas, d'autres drogues peuvent également, il y a le facteur de l'alcoolisme, de la pauvreté, de la drogue et toutes ces choses qui amènent ceux qui sont censés protéger les enfants à abuser eux-mêmes de ces enfants-là.
Effectivement. Et comme je le disais à Bekonzo, nous avons une longue histoire sur les réseaux.
Hi, Vicky. Sorry.
Hello, welcome back. Is it Noella?
Yes, this is Nola. I'm sorry. I'm having some internet trouble.
Yes, I'm sorry. But we're happy that you're back on this list. So we were just talking about.
I just wanted to add that one of the factors that would, expose a child to more violence is crisis. And any kind of crisis, it can be socio-political crisis, like the ones that we're experiencing in the northwest and southwest regions. So I'm not sure if that was really mentioned, but that's one of the issues that would expose children to violence, because these crises would cause children to be separated from their parents. So we're talking about children who eventually become unaccompanied or separated children who lose either both parents within the context of the crisis. So especially in the northwest and southwest regions of Cameroon right now, and then the COVID-19, these children in these regions are exposed to more violence than children in other regions, because first there is the trauma that comes from the crisis, and then many of them have lost their parents. Others' parents have lost, the source of livelihood that they had, and then they're dealing with all of that. Earlier on, I don't know if it's Judwin or Madame Karin mentioned that poor stress management would cause parents to react to issues in a particular way that can be violent and abusive. So I just wanted to highlight that crisis would cause children to be exposed to more violence than children in communities where there is no violence.
All right. Thank you very much, Noella, for this brilliant intervention. Of course, some of the points that you just raised were touched by Madam Karine and Dr. Jidvin, but it's really appreciated because you came up with, more details. Okay, and then just before we lost you, we were talking about the basic facts, and you were telling us how common it is, and just to I think we heard the start of your intervention, and what I can say is Dr. Jidvin kind of agreed with what you were saying, and the whole conclusion is just that it is really frequent, and with the pandemic, it's actually probably underreported now, because Dr. Jidvin was saying that with school closed now, which is actually a place where child abuse is highly detected. Now we're having loads of children, suffering at home in silence with nobody to report it to. Do you agree with that, or is there anything that you want to add?
Yes, Vicky, I'd agree with that. I mean, 100%. Take for example an abuse like rape and sexual violence. For many girls who used to be or who have been victims of sexual violence, going out of the home used to be like a safe space for them. So they'll go to school or they'll go to to meet their friends or their friends' families, and they'll be able to share their stories. But now with COVID-19, people are expected to stay at home. So you stay at home where the violence persists, and there's really no one around. There is no safe space where you can go out to, or where you can, you can hang on to. So yes, I would agree with that 100%.
Okay, thank you very much. And just to remind our audience, because we're live, we have our audience is just reacting. And we have one of them saying that there's also the abuse that the girls do to themselves with breast ironing, the family, and female genital mutilations. So, what are your takes about that, ladies? Whoever wants to start.
So yeah, that's a very important point that the audience has highlighted. So female genital mutilation and breast ironing in the UK where I live, and I'm sure in the US and many other European countries, is illegal. It's actually criminal to carry out. But I know that I'm not sure about Cameroon. What the law says in Cameroon, I'd imagine that should be illegal as well. I'm not sure. It's until recently that I found out that those practices are actually quite common in Cameroon. But we have to remember that if we're addressing these cultural issues and you go about attacking people, people will not cooperate with you or collaborate with you. That includes child marriage as well. So those are both practices that in the UK, for example, a few years ago, a prominent doctor was prosecuted. I think that was in the US, actually. A prominent doctor was found circumcising females at her practice. So that's how deep-rooted some of these practices are, that someone is going to risk her license because she wants to circumcise children, which is against the law in the US. And so if the West is finding it difficult, and you can imagine in Cameroon where it's harder to enforce the law and those communities and those practices are more ingrained, it's a lot harder to pick up these things, to fight them. I remember when I worked in the East, I did work in a refugee camp in the East with Médecins Sans Frontières, and child marriages and breast ironing were so common. And I worked with malnourished kids, and I remember receiving a child who was badly burned because mom had misinterpreted advice. And I was furious. I was fuming at the fact that a mom is going to pour hot boiled water on a newborn baby's abdomen or tummy, in a bid to help heal the umbilical cord. And when mom came in, I saw a little she was about 12, 13 years old, and I just shut up. Like, I had nothing else to say. And so it's their culture. And unfortunately, these carry serious consequences, serious long-term effects as well. But we have to remember that in trying to address these issues, we have to get the community, the leaders, and all of that engaged. Otherwise, we'll just be fighting a futile battle. But I will talk about this a bit later, hopefully.
Madame Oshingam, je vous ai vu en train de fumer lorsque j'ai parlé de breast ironing. Est-ce que vous avez quelque chose ce que Dr. Nzo vient de dire?
Oui, docteur Vicky, je voudrais dire que c'est juste une question de région aussi. Parce que les régions, par exemple, au Cameroun, où on encourage le mariage précoce, il va de soi qu'on va laisser que la jeune fille se développe rapidement. Mais dans certaines régions où les gens préfèrent laisser l'enfant grandir, où on est un peu plus modernisé, on va vouloir presser le sein, passer le fer. À notre époque, ça se faisait beaucoup. Je connais des amis qui ont eu à le faire. Je connais des membres de famille à qui on a eu à faire cela. Et il y a une autre région, c'est l'Afrique de l'Ouest, où j'ai habité pendant un moment, où j'ai remarqué également que les jeunes bébés, carrément des bébés de sexe féminin, on leur verse de l'eau chaude sur le sexe, sous prétexte qu'elles ne seront pas sexuellement trop actives quand elles seront grandes. Donc, on dit là-bas que ça permet à la fille de rester fidèle à son époux, elle ne sera pas frivole. Mais à la longue, avec les amis qu'on a rencontrés de ce côté-là, ça a plutôt tendance à les rendre frigides. Donc, quand elles sont petites, on fait ça en disant non, ça va faire qu'elle soit fidèle à son époux, elle ne pourra pas vagabonder. Mais ça a des conséquences sur leurs relations sexuelles plus tard dans leur foyer. Donc, pour une autre fois, c'est une question de région, de culture et de coutume également.
Okay. Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Vicky, if I might just say
Yes, of
something
course.
about so talking about breast ironing and female genital mutilation, these are harmful traditional practices to say the least. Um, it's key that they are cultural practices, as Dr. Jordan and Madam Karine have mentioned. It's also very important for us to highlight that it's from a patriarchal perspective, because if we realize these are carried on especially on girls, in fact entirely on girls, and the goal for most of these cultures is to control her sexuality, is to control how she feels or how she relates with one another. I mean, imagine sending off a 13-year-old girl to be married because you do not want her to have sex with young boys at that age, and more like should not become few, or because you think that, oh, she's growing older than her age, young boys would see her and want to defile in quotes, and all of that is part of what we're saying. That's a form of inequality that is not just abuse against girls. It's immoral, it's criminal, and it shouldn't even exist. Girls should be able to thrive. They should be able to grow as healthy as other children. They should be able to be themselves. I mean, it's biological. I didn't or no girl has control over how she develops breast. Am I right, doctor? Um,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, no one controls that. So the entire point of the background for female genital mutilation and breast ironing, it's all about control, something that shouldn't exist. And I would agree with what Dr. Zo said about what approach are we using to eliminate these practices. It has to be one that is all inclusive, and it's really also a holistic approach that we're working with community leaders, men and boys, who most often are the custodians of these customs and traditions, because there's nothing that you can say without an imam, for example, or without the chief or the founder of a community. So it's a gradual process, but I think that platforms like this, it's a step in the right direction to say, oh, this is criminal, we should look towards this direction and see how we can stop that.
Okay. Thank you very much, Noella. And you've given us actually, just a sneak peek of what we can expect actually that is happening in Cameroon to address this other pandemic, because it sounds like it is a pandemic and we need to accept it now. Right. So just before we take a break, let's just talk about, how you recognize a child that is being abused. It's clear that children abused physically, you clearly see, all the injuries that they're having on their body. But how do you recognize a child that is being abused emotionally, for example, or sexually? Because sometimes, you just can't see. But I know that you all work with children. So you just tell us how a typical abused child look like or behave itself. And I will start with Noella.
Um, Thank you very much, Vicky. As you said, sometimes it's difficult to tell if it's not physical abuse. So if it's not physical abuse where you cannot clearly detect the bruises or the scars, it's hard to say whether a child is being abused or not. But from my experience, working with children, is that a child, for example, who is experiencing sexual abuse or who has been abused before would um most often be withdrawn. He or she would not like to interact with other children, say in public or in some spaces. Sometimes they would want to be on their own and not say anything when every other person is talking. Other times, some children would be super active. Um, So in a way to say, I need to forget about everything that's going on and just try to be a normal child. So sometimes we see children in communities who want to be everywhere. So you're doing an activity and notice them, and just with the hope that maybe someone would notice something. So we have also children who would present with some quiet, some quietness that's in, no matter how noisy the place is, no matter how loud everyone is, they're just quiet. Typically you want to find out what's going on with this child. Why are you so quiet? Is everything okay? Do you want to talk about whatever is going on? So for many of them, they're internalizing the trauma or the experiences that they've had, maybe at home or in their communities. For me, that's typically how we'd want to identify children who are going through some form of abuse or the other.
Thank you, Noella. Madame Shingham, quelque chose à rajouter à ce que Noella vient de nous dire?
Oui, docteur Vicky, je pense que ma consoeur a bien expliqué. Les enfants sont soit très réticents, soit très brutaux. Donc, vous allez trouver des enfants qui ont été violentés, soit sexuellement, soit physiquement. Ils sont peut-être trop calmes ou alors trop agités. Je peux parler de mon expérience personnelle. J'ai eu une enfance difficile et à cause de cela, j'étais plutôt très violente. Et vraiment, c'était pas facile à gérer. Mais d'autres enfants restent, je connais d'autres enfants avec qui je travaille dans la rue, qui sont plutôt très réticents. Ils restent fermés sur eux-mêmes. Il faut beaucoup de patience pour arriver à travailler avec ces enfants-là. Donc, on a les deux situations. Soit ils sont trop extravertis, soit introvertis. Et des fois, c'est pénible. Pourtant, il faut bien qu'ils parlent, surtout quand c'est des violences sexuelles. Il faut que l'enfant arrive à parler pour qu'on sache justement comment pouvoir l'aider à se remettre de cela. Les violences physiques, c'est des fois peu criard parce qu'on peut remarquer des marques ou des traits sur l'enfant, donc c'est plus facile. L'enfant n'a pas trop besoin de parler, mais des violences émotionnelles ou des violences sexuelles, ça a besoin d'un peu plus de tact, un peu plus d'attention, n'est-ce pas, pour remarquer cela et pouvoir approcher l'enfant pour l'aider.
Merci beaucoup. Dr. Nzo, you are a pediatric doctor, so you receive those children in hospital. I'm quite sure that you've seen them behaving the way Noella and Karin just brilliantly explained. But talking about emotional and sexual in particular, just tell us a little bit about what you do in hospital to, get those kids and just, spot them.
Thank you very much, Vicky. So for starters, I'm going to say that it's everybody's responsibility to be able to spot child abuse and to take action when you spot it. And unfortunately, child abuse is most often goes unrecognized for various reasons. Either the child is afraid to speak out, or other people see things and are afraid to speak out for various reasons, or families trying to protect people. And so I'm going to address the bit about the emotional abuse, but let's start with neglect. So like I said, neglect is the most common form of child abuse that exists and that we see as well. Even in England, you'd be surprised, but I've seen children coming really, really filthy. Then sometimes you can't even get into their room because of how dirty they are. So just the overall physical appearance of the child being really unkempt, and also, children sometimes would have chronic infections, eczema, scabies, and with late presentation to the hospitals. That's another form of abuse, neglect, and undernutrition. So in the UK, what we commonly see is like micronutrient deficiencies, for example, vitamin D, calcium, children coming in with rickets, and sometimes that's more out of ignorance. But also obesity, like I did mention earlier on in the show, we've had children being removed from their parents because of obesity, and not just because of obesity, but because the family wouldn't engage with social services to help this child, and the child got removed. And in terms of physical abuse, so we've had really children as young as newborn babies who come in, sadly pass away even because they've had violent abuse. So the most common kind of abuse that we see in those children are like bruises. So looking at physical injury. So like I said, all of us, not just doctors in the hospital, but all of us in the community, your neighbor, it's our responsibility to be able to spot these signs and to report them. So newborn babies. So unfortunately, some children can come in dead from child abuse, and that's not uncommon, neither in Cameroon, neither in the UK where I live, and neither in the US. And so you can have the shaken baby. So that's it's not an unusual presentation where newborn babies are brutally shaken and then they have brain injury, their eyes are damaged, and it can result in long-term disabilities. And you also have a battered child, a child that comes in with various injuries that you cannot explain. So in a walking child, in a child who doesn't walk, a 3-month-old baby, for example, you don't expect to see bruises on the face, on the legs, because they cannot walk, or some kind of fractures. But in older children, you look at marks, for example, a belt mark or hot water burns, and you know that it's either neglect sometimes or deliberately inflicted injury. And in terms of sexual abuse as well, so some children will just be quiet in the face of their perpetrators. Sometimes, the change of attitude. That also applies to emotional abuse. So children can just have significant mental health problems, or they can just change attitude completely, or have poor performance at school. A child who was previously really bright just suddenly is just doing poorly, and you can't really explain why. And they also have issues with their interactions with friends. Some kids get really rowdy, on the contrary, and those are things that as parents you have to explore if you see your child behaving that way. And sexual abuse is really very important to identify as well, because it has really terrible consequences on children, both boys and girls. So I've had male friends who've spoken to me about usually it's an older girl in the neighborhood who abused them sexually. And unfortunately, male sexual abuse is highly under-recognized, even more so than female sexual abuse, because many boys, because they've had an orgasm, they wouldn't think that it was a bad thing. They wouldn't even think to report it. And much later in life, then they recognize that they've been abused. So things to look out for in children, things like a change in bowel habits, like a child can suddenly become very constipated, maybe because they've got lots of pain down below, and even diarrhea, or just having blood in their stool, bloody discharge in girls, and just recurrent urinary tract infections. If you have especially a girl child who keeps having recurrent urinary tract infection, then that's something to be aware of. Think about it and explore. And even worse still, sexually transmissible diseases, and in extreme cases sometimes pregnancy. So those are I just try to give an overview of the kind of things to expect when you're looking for signs of child abuse in a child.
Do you want to promote your business? Do you want to talk about your nonprofit organization? Do you want to talk about your culture? Introducing the online web TV, Afrique Today. Fogham. You can watch us live at the same time on 4 platforms: Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and using the Afrique Today app. Download our app today for Android or Apple. Promote your business today. For more information, go to www.afriquetoday.com. Afrique Today, the best of digital TV.
En vue de performer vos compétences et intégrer l'espace de l'entrepreneuriat digital, la nouvelle chambre de commerce nationale et la nouvelle chambre de commerce USA-RDC, en partenariat avec Diaspo Academy, installée aux États-Unis d'Amérique, vous offrent des sessions de formation en entrepreneuriat digital à des coûts réduits. Ces formations vous permettront d'intégrer le monde numérique et améliorer vos compétences en digital au bénéfice de cette terre d'avenir et grand marché qu'est la République démocratique du Congo. Pour participer aux formations, envoyez vos contacts WhatsApp au +243 99 073 0795. Enregistrez-vous aujourd'hui car les places sont limitées. Diaspo Academy, la plateforme des professionnels du digital.
L'entrepreneuriat digital vous intéresse-t-il? Vous voulez apprendre à construire des projets digitaux? Aimeriez-vous gagner des revenus passifs conséquents en tout lieu? Voici la plateforme des professionnels du digital, la Diaspo Academy. Ici, vous retrouverez les meilleurs professionnels de la diasporama mondiale connectés sur notre plateforme. Vous allez pouvoir acquérir des formations adéquates qui feront de vous des entrepreneurs digitaux compétents. Étudiants, entrepreneurs, coachs, instructeurs et entreprises, Diaspo Academy est une opportunité pour vous. Elle vous offre la possibilité de suivre votre formation en mode virtuel à partir de chez vous, ou que vous soyez sur la planète. Toutes nos formations disponibles en ligne sont dispensées de manière interactive. Il suffit de vous inscrire et vous pourrez les suivre depuis chez vous. Au cours de la formation, vous passerez des quiz et examens selon votre parcours. En outre, à partir de votre tableau de bord, vous suivrez vos performances et progressions. Vous pourrez aussi communiquer avec vos instructeurs et recevoir des notifications. À la fin de votre parcours de formation, vous recevrez un certificat Diaspo Academy Certified. Que vous soyez débutant ou responsable d'entreprise, Diaspo Academy est une opportunité pour vous. Saisissez-la. Enfin, que vous soyez coach ou instructeur, ayez accès à un millier d'étudiants à travers notre plateforme. Merci de choisir Diaspo Academy, le meilleur choix. Pour plus d'informations, allez sur www.diaspoacademy.com. Diaspo Academy, la plateforme des professionnels du digital.
Nous sommes de retour sur cette plateforme pour parler de la prise en charge des enfants victimes de violences sexuelles. Et pour ceux qui veulent nous rejoindre, je suis Dr Kamoa et avec moi, Dr Ngo, Miss Noëlla Epier et Madame Mushingam. Nous discutons de violences domestiques en ces temps de pandémie. Alors, juste avant la pause, nous parlions de comment reconnaître un enfant qui est victime de violence à la maison par quelqu'un de son entourage, généralement les parents, ou alors ceux qui s'occupent d'eux à la maison. Et nous avions Dr. Judvin Zo, who was actually really explaining, and it was just all passionate about what was happening. So, Dr. Nzo, is there anything that you like to say at this point?
I think so far, I think we covered quite a lot. So, like you said, we went from defining everything, child abuse, and laying out what to expect with child abuse. I hope you listened to the last part of what I did say about trying to identify a child who's being abused. And like I said earlier, it's everyone's responsibility. There's been a case in the US recently of a child who was picked up by a lady, a strange lady, and a gentleman, and it was actually a black woman and a black child. The black woman picking up a black child, and a white gentleman noticed that there was something a bit odd about the interaction, and decided to stop the child and stop the couple and that's how he intercepted a child being abducted in broad daylight. So, like I said earlier, if it feels strange, if it looks strange, if you have any doubts, speak out, try to find a solution, because you may be the one person that's going to save the life of that child.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nzo. Madame Karine, comment reconnaissez-vous un enfant qui a été abusé à la maison de tous ces enfants avec lesquels vous travaillez chaque jour?
Oui, merci beaucoup, Dr. Vicky. Comme je le disais déjà, il faut remarquer que ces enfants sont pour la plupart très calmes ou trop bruyants. Donc, quand vous remarquez qu'un enfant est trop calme, ou bien qu'il est en présence d'un adulte un peu craintif, l'enfant peut-être est en train de jouer et dès que quelqu'un apparaît, il se retire, ou alors vous regardez, il a l'air d'être effrayé. Ça veut dire que peut-être cet adulte-là, n'est-ce pas, abuse l'enfant d'une certaine forme, peut-être physiquement ou sexuellement ou émotionnellement. Vous remarquez aussi des enfants qui sont vous remarquez dans votre voisinage, il peut y avoir des enfants qui ont des bleus sur eux. Vous allez leur poser quelques questions et vous allez vous rendre compte que les parents frappent beaucoup ces enfants-là. Donc, dans ce cas-là, nous approchons des fois les parents pour leur demander de ne pas avoir des corrections trop sévères, des corrections qui vont faire mal à leur enfant. Parce qu'en frappant, des fois, nous avons eu des cas où des personnes qui disent corriger leur enfant, mais qui ont frappé jusqu'à mort. Et donc, on leur dit de voir une juste limite, n'est-ce pas? Parce que la correction en Afrique, vous savez que c'est très difficile de faire la part entre la correction et n'est-ce pas, la violence. Donc, certains parents te disent que non, j'étais juste en train de corriger mon enfant. Il faut qu'on leur apprenne à corriger l'enfant avec amour, sans faire du mal à leur propre enfant. Donc, on remarque ces petits signes.
À la fin, nous allons justement parler de comment arriver à faire la différence entre corriger l'enfant et être en train d'abuser un enfant. Et je pense que c'est sorry.
Non, je disais c'est très important que les parents puissent faire la différence entre corriger et abuser, n'est-ce pas, d'un enfant. Il faudrait qu'ils sachent à quel moment ils sont en train d'exposer l'enfant à un danger peut-être de mort ou à un traumatisme sur le plan de la santé ou bien sur le plan mental.
Yes. Okay. So let's talk about the management. How do we manage those children, Dr. Nzo? How do you manage those children? Just briefly, so that we can quickly wrap up for our audience.
Yeah, right. So for starters, you have to make sure this child is all right. So I'm just going to give an ideal case scenario. If you have a child who presents with suspicion of child abuse, you have to make sure this child is physically all right. Are they, if they're emotionally or sexually abused or physically abused, do they have any life-threatening injuries that can be treated? And then, so you have to try to identify the source of the abuse. If it's from a home environment, are there any other children in the home environment? And are they safe? Usually, if this child is unsafe, then the other children in the home environment are likely to be unsafe. What will usually happen is that if we're removing this child, we're going to have to remove the other children as well. And so you also have to try to engage them. If they have mental health problems and they need readjusting, and if they have to move to foster placement, then they're going to need significant mental health support. And it's important to remind people that the role of social services is not to remove people's children. Social services are there to support children, to support parents, and make sure that these children have a good environment, a healthy, thriving environment. Unfortunately, both for white and for black people, when they hear mention of social services, everyone takes leave, everyone panics. No one wants to have anything to do with social services. So social services can just, their role can just be to make sure the housing environment is clean, or just make sure that there's adequate food. If there's, do you need a lot more financial support? We can support you in trying to get aid from the government. So all of that is part of managing. And unfortunately, sometimes in the management of child abuse, it can get to the point of needing police intervention or needing the courts to intervene to ensure that this child or its siblings remain protected. So, all of that is, so it's a really multidisciplinary management. It's not one team that manages, but like I mentioned earlier as well, and getting the community engaged. So in a place like the UK, some things are easier to enforce. But in a place like Cameroon, like Madame Karine rightly said, a lot of cultural differences, some practices here differ significantly, but usually most of those practices are criminal. The law is against those practices are against the law. And so
Right.
but however, in trying to address them, we have to ensure that we have an inclusive approach and make sure we get the community involved in trying to find solutions, long-term solutions. Thanks, Vicky.
All right. Thank you very much. Madame Mushingham, un mot sur la prise en charge de cet enfant, juste rapidement.
Oui, docteur Vicky, merci beaucoup. Je voudrais dire que la première prise en charge passe d'abord par la prévention et la sensibilisation. C'est mieux de prévenir et de sensibiliser les parents et toute la population sur le mal que nous avons à violenter nos enfants, parce que ce n'est pas seulement sur l'immédiat, mais à long terme, il y a de grands problèmes et des grands maux qui se posent dans la société à cause de cette maltraitance-là. Donc la première chose, c'est vraiment sensibiliser les gens, sensibiliser la population sur le besoin de donner plus d'amour à leurs enfants. Moi, j'ai l'habitude de dire, on ne peut pas bâtir une société si on a une enfance ratée. Donc, si on a le souci d'une société meilleure que nous allons le laisser, c'est pas vraiment faire attention à nos enfants, et c'est la responsabilité de chacun d'entre nous, docteur Judith le disait tout à l'heure, les services sociaux ne sont pas là pour sanctionner, mais pour nous accompagner. Si vous êtes parent et que vous avez certaines difficultés à éduquer vos enfants ou à les aimer ou à les protéger, peut-être même vous avez des penchants, n'est-ce pas, de pédophiles ou quoi, je ne sais pas si vous souffrez peut-être d'alcoolisme et vous voyez que vous êtes en train de faire tort à vos enfants ou à votre voisinage, vous pouvez demander de l'aide au service social, vous pouvez leur demander des conseils, ils peuvent vous orienter vers des médecins ou des psychologues qui vont vous aider, n'est-ce pas, à guérir et ne plus faire du mal aux enfants. Les enfants même que nous abordons en tant qu'association, si ce sont des violences physiques, nous les accompagnons avec les soins de santé dans des hôpitaux partenaires pour que ces enfants-là puissent guérir. Et nous parlons aussi vraiment beaucoup avec les tuteurs, les tantes, les oncles ou les parents même. Nous les amenons à donner beaucoup d'amour parce que, je dis, on guérit plus par l'amour. Quelqu'un qui souffre de l'intérieur, même s'il a des séquelles physiques, le grand mal s'est passé à l'intérieur de lui. Donc, il faut guérir la personne aussi en lui apportant beaucoup d'amour. Et je pense que en incluant toute la société, en incluant tout le monde, nous arrivons, n'est-ce pas, à réparer les dommages que nous avons causés à ces enfants-là pour qu'ils soient des meilleurs adultes.
Merci beaucoup. Est-ce que, en quelques mots seulement, est-ce que vous pouvez nous parler de votre association Save a Child Cameroon?
Oui, Save a Child Cameroon, c'est une association qui prend en charge les enfants orphelins, les enfants de la rue et les personnes en situation difficile. Nous avons des personnes en situation difficile. Les personnes que nous appelons les personnes en situation difficile sont des jeunes mères qui, sans le vouloir, ont eu des grossesses précoces et ont dû peut-être arrêter leur étude. Donc, nous essayons de leur trouver des formations ou de leur trouver un moyen, comme ça, de partir, par exemple, en ayant une formation ou à repartir à l'école. Donc, voilà les personnes que nous appelons les personnes en situation difficile. Même dans notre entourage, si nous voyons des jeunes filles qui veulent faire peut-être un petit commerce, qui ont des enfants en main, on peut les orienter vers un orphelinat. Vous pouvez garder vos enfants là-bas en journée pour faire vos activités et revenir les chercher. Donc, nous nous occupons un peu des enfants de la rue en leur apportant notre soutien et beaucoup de conseils. Parce qu'avec les enfants de la rue, c'est un peu plus difficile car ils prennent les adultes pour responsables de ce qui leur arrive. Et en fait, ils n'ont pas tort parce que la plupart du temps, ils quittent les maison à cause de la maltraitance, un parent qui a pris une deuxième femme et la deuxième femme qui ne veut pas des enfants de la première, un parent qui est décédé, un parent qui a des difficultés, qui envoie son enfant chez sa sœur et qui la sœur prend l'enfant pour faire un esclave, une domestique carrément dans la maison. Donc, Save a Child Cameroun essaye d'assister toutes ces personnes-là avec, à la limite de nos ressources, nous essayons de ramener, comme nous disons, ramener l'espoir, n'est-ce pas, en partageant notre plus gros partage. C'est l'amour, beaucoup d'amour, parce qu'il faut être patient avec des personnes qui souffrent de l'intérieur, vous savez. Il faut être beaucoup patient avec les personnes qui souffrent de l'intérieur. Parce que la violence physique ou la violence faite aux enfants, les conséquences sont plus internes qu'on ne le croit et se développent à long terme même. Sur le coup, c'est rien, mais à long terme, ça a de gros dégâts sur la personnalité de ces enfants qui sont devenus adultes. Donc, nous accompagnons comme ça.
Aussi un peu durant ce show, comment est-ce que ça peut affecter leur personnalité également. Merci beaucoup, nous sommes en admiration du travail que vous faites. Et voilà, et je voudrais donner la parole donc à Miss Noella. Miss Noella, just in few words, can you just tell us, what do we do? How do we manage those kids? How can we emphasize the different duty bearers of the protection of children, especially children affected by the crisis? And just quickly, do you have, any resources or, any association that they can run to when they are in need, just to finish?
Thank you so much, Vicky. Once again, thank you so much for having me. I think the first thing to highlight is that in case you need me to, so as much as we talk about abuse, generally we need to understand, or our viewers need to understand, that for every child who has been abused, that child has its own uniqueness, and so we cannot manage all cases of abuse the same way. So a child who comes who has been sexually abused and another who has been physically abused, those are two different cases of abuse, and we cannot treat them the same way. That therefore leads me to the point that the management for children who are survivors of abuse has to be holistic. So all of the companies that have taken children who have been sexually abused to hospitals, and the nurses are dragging their feet and just acting as they please. But as hard as it may seem, that's an emergency and it should be treated as such. Again, we cannot blame children for the abuse that they experience for no reason. We live in communities where children suffer abuse, either the parents or the caregiver or someone in the community thinks that, oh, it's your fault, you didn't do something right. Especially when it comes to sexual violence, that girls have been blamed for, oh, you wore a short skirt, you have been seducing your uncle or the brother in the house, that this now is happening to you. People need to understand that survivors of abuse, children, they need their support. So a child has been abused and you cannot afford to blame him or her. You have to support as much as you can. These children need safe spaces. It is and as being said, it's all our responsibility to be there for the children, to look after them. Currently I am aware of many services that are available, especially to children in the Northwest and Southwest. Medical services, livelihood services that also work with parents to see how they can adequately take care of their children, how they can manage the stress given the hardships that they might go through. So again, as Judith said, it's everyone's responsibility. We have doctors here in the Northwest and Southwest. We have other ministries or delegations that support children who have been abused, as well as international organizations that try to support children with different services who have been abused.
Thank you very much, Noella, for this very explicit response. And just to finish, Dr. Judvin, is there any number that you have for us, or any, in the United Kingdom? Because in the United Kingdom, Mrs. Mushingam and and Mr. Noella Epie has given us, a few spots where to call for help. So, do you have any idea in the UK?
So if you have any issues, so there's an emergency number which works for all sorts of emergencies. So if you suspect child abuse, just ring 999. That's the emergency number. If you think it's really urgent, and especially the life-threatening injuries and stuff. But if you're worried, you can always ring 111 if it's a non-urgent kind of problem.
Okay, and I believe that you can have more information maybe on the government site, and then you can just type it. I know that there are various numbers that they can call. Right, I'm just going to give this number if you're in the United States of America, USA Child Abuse Hotline. You can call, text, or chat 24/7, and that is 1-800-4-A-child, and child, that is CHILD, and the number will be 1-800-422-4453. Well, we have come at the end of this show, our three-part series. It has been a pleasure to have all the panelists that I've had during this saga, 8 of them, and these 3 fantastic last panelists with me today. Thank you for listening. Hopefully you've learned a thing or two. Stay tuned on Afrique Today TV. Good night.
Do you want to promote your business? Do you want to talk about your nonprofit organization? Do you want to talk about your culture? Introducing the online web TV, Afrique Today. Fogham. You can watch us live at the same time on 4 platforms: Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and using the Afrique Today app. Download our app today for Android or Apple. Promote your business today. For more information, go to www.afriquetoday.com. Afrique Today, the best of digital TV. Watch Democracy Grow, in collaboration with other diaspora organizations, are delighted to invite you to the 2020 Annual Zoom Conference, scheduled to take place October 24th, 25th, 26th, and 27th from 9:30 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This year's theme, Building a Healthy and Wealthy Africa. And for the topics to be discussed, do not miss these as well. Just go to watchdemocracygrow.org and register for this conference by clicking the event button. Then go to Zoom registration. But also, as you watch Democracy Grow, don't forget that early voting starts October 26th in Montgomery County, Maryland.
En vue de performer vos compétences et intégrer l'espace de l'entrepreneuriat digital, la nouvelle chambre de commerce nationale et la nouvelle chambre de commerce USA-RDC, en partenariat avec Diaspo Academy, installée aux États-Unis d'Amérique, vous offre des sessions de formation en entrepreneuriat digital à des coûts réduits. Ces formations vous permettront d'intégrer le monde numérique et améliorer vos compétences en digital au bénéfice de cette terre d'avenir et grand marché qu'est la République démocratique du Congo. Pour participer aux formations, envoyez vos contacts WhatsApp au plus 243 99 073 0795. Enregistrez-vous aujourd'hui car les places sont limitées. Diaspo Academy, la plateforme des professionnels du digital.
Do you want to promote your business? Do you want to talk about your nonprofit organization? Do you want to talk about your culture? Introducing the online web TV, Afrique Today, Fogham, where you can watch us live at the same time on 4 platforms: Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and using the Afrique Today app. Download our app today for Android or Apple. Promote your business today. For more information, go to www.afriquetoday.com. Afrique Today, the best of digital TV. Watch Democracy Grow, in collaboration with other diaspora organizations, are delighted to invite you to the 2020 Annual Zoom Conference, scheduled to take place October 24th, 25th, 26th, and 27th from 9:30 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This year's theme, Building a Healthy and Wealthy Africa. And for the topics to be discussed, do not miss these as well. Just go to watchdemocracygrow.org and register for this conference by clicking the event button. Then go to Zoom registration. But also, as you watch Democracy Grow, don't forget that early voting starts October 26th in Montgomery County, Maryland.
L'entrepreneuriat digital vous intéresse-t-il? Vous voulez apprendre à construire des projets digitaux? Aimeriez-vous gagner des revenus passifs conséquents en tout lieu? Voici la plateforme des professionnels du digital, la Diaspo Academy. Ici, vous retrouverez les meilleurs professionnels de la diasporama mondiale connectés sur notre plateforme. Vous allez pouvoir acquérir des formations adéquates qui feront de vous des entrepreneurs digitaux compétents. Étudiants, entrepreneurs, coachs, instructeurs et entreprises, Diaspo Academy est une opportunité pour vous. Elle vous offre la possibilité de suivre votre formation en mode virtuel à partir de chez vous, où que vous soyez sur la planète. Toutes nos formations disponibles en ligne sont dispensées de manière interactive. Il suffit de vous inscrire et vous pourrez les suivre depuis chez vous. Au cours de la formation, vous passerez des quiz et examens selon votre parcours. En outre, à partir de votre tableau de bord, vous suivrez vos performances et progressions. Vous pourrez aussi communiquer avec vos instructeurs et recevoir des notifications. À la fin de votre parcours de formation, vous recevrez un certificat Diaspo Academy Certified. Que vous soyez débutant ou responsable d'entreprise, Diaspo Academy est une opportunité pour vous. Saisissez-la! Enfin, que vous soyez coach ou instructeur, ayez accès à un millier d'étudiants à travers notre plateforme. Merci de choisir Diaspo Academy, le meilleur choix. Pour plus d'informations, allez sur www.diaspoacademy.com. Diaspo Academy, la plateforme des professionnels du digital.
Good evening to everyone joining us for the third and last part of our 3-part series on domestic violence. I am happy to welcome you again on Afrique Today TV, a digital African TV based in the United States of America. I'm happy to, the topic today is domestic child abuse. This program is sponsored by the Pacha Foundation, a charity based in the United States of America, and the Cameroon Doctors Association, a registered charity in the United Kingdom, also known as Camdock UK. For the past few weeks, you have probably been made aware, or you have probably seen videos and read testimonies of women, young girls, and even child abuse. The perpetrators, for the most part, were individuals living with them. So allow me to say it again on this introduction. Subject of abuse is still a taboo in most communities in general, but Black and African homes in particular. This is part of the reason why we have decided to get the cat out of the bag and discuss it, to raise awareness on the impact such behaviors can have on our loved ones. If you've been following us since the beginning and have listened to part 1 and part 2 of this saga, then you know by now that COVID-19 pandemic played a huge part in increasing the rate of domestic violence. Nous conduirons cette émission en français et en anglais, comme pour les émissions précédentes, étant donné que notre audience est bilingue. Je suis Dr. Vicky Moi, chercheur clinique à l'Université de Birmingham au Royaume-Uni et trésorière de l'association Camdock UK. Today with me are 3 fabulous ladies working with children, and together we will explore the impact that domestic abuse has on our kids. Our fourth panelist is Mrs. Karen Mushingam. She is a corporate communicator, graduate in human resources management. She is the president, founder of Save a Child Cameroon, which is an NGO taking care of orphans, street children, and people in difficulties. She is passionate about youth. She devotes part of her life to supporting young girls and enable them to reach their full potential. Mrs. Karen Mushingam firmly believes that, motivated by love, we can improve the living conditions of those around us. She's a mother of 3 children and she's a wife. She's also co-founder of a religious organization, ELL Ministry, that stands for Eden Love and Love. Please welcome with me Ms. Karen Mushingam. Good evening, Karen. Would you like to say something?
Good evening, our viewers and all those who are listening to us. I know we have a nice show, and I think through this show, people will know more about how to handle children and how to make them more happy and raise awareness against violence on children.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mrs. Karen. So our second panelist is Dr. Judwin Doe. Dr. Doe is a pediatric doctor at Queen's Medical Centre in Nottingham, United Kingdom. She's a public health nutritionist. She knows everything about food, and also the General Secretary for Camdock UK. Welcome, Dr. Doe.
Well, thank you very much, Vicky.
Right, and our last panelist, but not least, and you will agree with me during this show, is Miss Noella Epier. Noella is a feminist and activist for gender equality. She's also the host of a show, Straight Talk with Noella Epier. Currently, Noella is an aid worker in the northwest region of Cameroon and has a lot of experience in working with children, and especially those.
Do you want to promote your business? Do you want to talk about your nonprofit organization? Do you want to talk about your culture? Introducing the online web TV, Afrique Today, Fogham, where you can watch us live at the same time on 4 platforms: Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and using the Afrique Today app. Download our app today for Android or Apple. Promote your business today. For more information, go to www.afriquetoday.com.